Hi, I'm Jessica Morey, and my nickname is JMA, and we're here at Inward Bound Mindfulness Education, I be me, at our international headquarters in Concord, Massachusetts, and I am the executive director and a lead teacher for Inward Bound Mindfulness teen retreats. And in fact, I went on my first retreat a quarter century ago when I was 14. I fell madly in love with meditation practice and mindfulness as a teenager, after that first retreat, and went back every year, and then went to Asia and practiced in a monastery for a while, and did a 3-month retreat when I was in college. And right alongside of that great love and passion was climate and clean energy work. Mm-hmm. My nickname when I was 9 was Save a Tree. So it's always been a big passion of mine to care about the earth, and those two passions grew together. So they've been mutually supportive for me throughout my life. So after actually did my degree in engineering, environmental engineering, and worked in clean energy and climate policy, and so I would say that my meditation practice has been a major resource for me in that work in the world. And I think it can be a resource for teachers, both for their own work, because anyone who's a teacher these days is doing what I would consider basically a social activist work, and especially if you're working in a low-income or community or school that's under-resourced, which is unfortunately most of our schools today. So just that, how do we be social activists, and how does our practice support that? And then the other piece of it is that I feel really committed that mindfulness practice, when we teach it to young people, is not just about them feeling calmer or behaving better or getting better test scores, or for me it's really about young people discovering who they are, what they value, and what they want to do in the world. And already, so young people care about the planet. They care about what's wrong with the planet. They see it. They haven't numbed out yet. So it's just natural to me that we would talk about how these practices, and we would teach about how these practices can support who and how they want to be in the world. Giving me the energy to keep going. Something about that, working in climate change, and I sort of still feel it now. It's kind of depressing. Especially when you think about it, I got really involved in this 20 years ago. And at that time I was oh my God, this is a terrible crisis. We need to do something. And here we are 20 years later, and we haven't done very much. And we can just see the results of our actions and the destruction of the planet more and more all the time. So just that, how do you deal with the overwhelm and the pain, but just in some ways a searing pain of these issues without collapsing, And then also the other piece of it is how do you fuel the work not from anger, not from rage or hatred, or so it's you don't fall to either side of just shutting down and suppressing or acting out in rage and anger and creating an other and an enemy, and I feel our practice can actually help us to figure out that line in the middle. The way that I think is really important to begin is using our practice to highlight first what's okay and what's working in our lives. So what are the resources that we have? Where's the beauty? Because there's beauty, paying attention to what's working. And that is, again, this is sort of countercultural when you think about the news. They don't often highlight this, but where is the kindness? There are thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who care as much as I do, as much as you do. There are people doing stuff every day to try to improve the situation, using their ingenuity. Use that to energize and ground ourselves. And then out of that place of energy and grounding that we know we can always come back to, we can then start to begin to explore our own suffering, the pain that we actually feel related to the way things are. So that's part of what we can do when we explore what we're feeling, is actually start to untangle it. Like, what in there is, like, is there aversion in there? I don't want things to be the way they are. Is there hopelessness? And kind of see if we can just get to the sadness and just hold the sadness, And maybe there's also this wish of, like, what we wish could be. We can just hold that, the wanting, just that. So if we can learn how to just hold our sadness and our wanting with a lot of tenderness and courage and vulnerability, and then see what kind of wisdom and creativity arises out of that wanting and sadness. So it's not a reactive shutting it down or reactive. In many ways, the way that we act in the world and many activists is actually because we can't stand feeling what we feel anymore, trying to press down or avoid or not feel those feelings. So if we can actually just open up to it and learn how to be with that, which is exactly what our meditation compassion practice helps us do, then we can see what arises. And so it starts with that feeling it and being with it in ourselves, which also then allows, the more that I feel comfortable and have the capacity to hold my own suffering, the more I'm going to be able to be with you and just face and hold and be with whatever it is that you're feeling, holding. And so for teachers who are working with kids today, we need that capacity. The teens and young people need us to be able to hold space for what they're going through. And so if I can do that for myself, then I can create the space to be with you and your suffering. Jonah Macy, who's a Buddhist and a meditation teacher as well, is a huge inspiration for me. And she talks a lot about how do we work with the despair, basically, of the planet. And so she talks about, and I think this all the time, and people will say this, like, I'm kind of like, if you don't experience some pain related to what's happening, like, that seems like something's wrong, right? So when people talk about young people being more anxious, more mental health issues, more depression, I'm like, no kidding. Of course. How could you not be seeing what's happening right now? So it's just like, it's what it means to be human and connected is to feel pain, right? But then it's about what do we do with that? The purpose is then to get us to act in a way that will reduce the pain. Not take something to just numb it out, but actually try to figure out how do we address it. There's so many activists talking about this now, about how do we imagine new futures, and that's how we get there, is by, and we do have can have a lack of imagination, but this is where young people can show us. They still have an imagination. Many people have brilliant creative ideas on retreat or when you're sitting alone. We kind of wipe away all the repetitive, neurotic thinking. Often there's a wellspring of creative possibility underneath that we can start to notice and pay attention to. One thing that I find really helpful to me is this distinction between empathy and compassion. And and this is really the work of Tanya Singer has really distinguished this, so who's a scientist and a researcher. So empathy is the idea that is the direct, attuned, felt sense of feeling with another person, with the earth, with another being, their suffering. But it could be their suffering or their joy, empathetic joy. But then in compassion is feeling that, and then the wish to help, the wish to alleviate the suffering. And so what Tanya Singer did, she did a bunch of brain studies on people doing empathy and compassion meditation, and saw that people doing empathy could burn out. It can be quite painful and get totally overwhelmed and burnt out. And whereas when they shifted to connecting with that wish to help, even not like doing the helping or knowing exactly what to do, but the wish to help, that actually is energizing and can be a kind of positive felt experience. So being sure that we make that shift and then letting the creative action come out of that wish